My neighbor loves the song Yeah by Usher. Like, she really loves it. I relive the early 2000s club hit almost daily. She intentionally backed into my wife's car because she claimed my wife was parked in her spot. That spot was on a public street in front of our house. The cops saw it differently than she did. When I first moved in my house, I didn't know my exact property line yet, so I put wood by a tree I thought was mine. Neighbor came over saying it was his tree, so I went ahead and got a survey to settle any troubles. He was pissed when I got 10 feet beyond the tree. Problem solved though. When I was around 10 years old, my neighbor would occasionally watch me open my mailbox to see if my GameStop magazine had arrived. She would threaten me each time, saying she was calling the cops and that it was illegal for me to check my parents' mail. I actually believed this until I was 15 years old. He came home from the bar with his friend, both drunk. They were screwing around with a pistol and accidentally shot through their floor down into my apartment. I got hit in the stomach, called 911, and when the ambulance was taking me away, my panicked fiancé registered sign was getting ready to leave because the EMTs told her to follow instead of riding with. My neighbor came down and was like, "What happened?" We heard a commotion. Cops were called and he got arrested. Edit. Couple of pics from the night. I was sitting on my couch with my legs out to the side. Lived on the top floor of a drug house in college because it was the only place that would let 7 of us rent together. The first week we were there, the SWAT team did a raid on one of the units. There were 3 below us. They busted in the door and used flashbang grenades on them. One of the other units smelled like urine and constantly had people coming in and out buying drugs. Our keys barely fit in the lock because people had tried to pick them so much. Our cable internet stopped working, so we called the cable company to come check it. The guy took us over to the box outside and showed us 9 different illegal lines that were ripping our internet. I could go on and on. On the plus side, we could shoot bottle rockets in our hallway because it wasn't like anyone was going to call the cops on us. My neighbors and my family were absolutely fine for about 7 years. It's a nice old man that was recently remarried. They have a 20-year-old student that parties from time to time, which is fine. But then one day out of nowhere we find our 1-year-old cat dead in their garden. Obviously we cannot be mad. The cat probably died of a heart attack or something, so my family shrugs it off as a coincidence. Fast forward 2 months, we have a new cat. Younger, cuter. I come home one day and my cat come crawling to me giving the loudest meow of his life. Turns out my cat was shot with a bullet. Our gardener told us that he clearly saw the neighbor with a gun, shooting pigeons or something, minutes before my cat was shot. So yeah, as you can imagine, we haven't been close to our neighbors since that day. PS, our cat survived with surgery. Perfectly fine. But only has 8 lives left. Edit. Yes, I agree with everyone. We should have taken him to court. But we had no physical proof other than the word of a gardener. And it was over a year ago, when I was just 14. So yeah, I'm upset that we didn't take it to the authorities. I was in the process of selling my town home, so I abandoned my house for a while and moved to another home. Dude took down the fence separating our townhomes and cut down my lemon tree. I was livid. Came home to her smoke-filled apartment. Called the fire dep when we couldn't find the cause. Turns out our downstairs neighbors put a charcoal grill on their stove so they could BBQ indoors. My only relief was a friend had walked my dog earlier that day, so I know he wasn't in a smoke-filled apt all afternoon. TLDR. Buy a carbon monoxide detector. I once had a neighbor in college that would knock on my door and ask for money. I would just say I'm a broke student and I can't spare anything. It was weird as duck and a weekly occurrence at the least. She was in her 50s and working. One day I got fed up when she knocked on my door. I think I was stressed for exams, and I said, "Yeah, I got some money for you." I asked her to hold out her hands and gave her maybe $2 worth of nickels that I had in a change jar. She never bothered me again. Retired woman on my street follows the garbage truck and moves the garbage cans off the street while the rest of us are at work, because they are an eyesore. This would be fine except she would leave them in the middle of the driveway and there is no stopping on our street during rush hour. bus route, so you either need to park a block away to move the garbage can then go get the car or risk getting a ticket while you move it. Since the houses are quite close together, we found out the first time by turning in and hitting the garbage can because it was just far enough back that you couldn't see it until you turned. We were trying to sell our house and the neighbor's meth head nephew was sabotaging it. When we'd leave so people could come look at it, he would sneak around just being creepy, which turned off a lot of buyers. He even went into my house during an open house and was telling people not to buy it. These people lived like 100 yards away and we still don't know what his deal was. Once he started threatening my sister who tried to help him after he passed out on my driveway. She's a nurse. We called the cops and he signed a paper that said if he was caught on the property again he'd be sent to jail. Luckily we were able to sell it after that. Some 15 years ago when my parents and I lived in Fort Wayne, Indiana, we ended up befriending one of the neighbors and her 2 kids. Well, one day, we're all hanging out together and I notice her son had some pretty bad bruises and a nice size knot on his head. I kinda shrugged it off and we continued playing. Well, that night the mother comes over and confesses to my mom she killed the boy. She ended up drowning him in the bathtub after beating him severely. She wasn't remorseful at all. When she left back to her house my mom called the cops immediately and she was arrested shortly after. She vowed that when she got out she'd kill my mom. We noped the duck out of Indiana and moved to another state. Edit. Grammatical errors. In the middle of the night strange noises would come from their apartment, like an owl mating with a German shepherd. In another, if I breathed too heavily, they'd come up and ask me to be quieter. I once told them that I was literally sitting on the couch reading a book and had no idea what noise they thought they were hearing. Another burned something in his oven. Rather than open his windows to get the smoke out, he opened his door to the hall and set off the whole building alarms. We had to all stand out in the cold and wait for the fire department while he watched from his apartment. The fire department opened his windows and told him he was an idiot. We still had to wait outside for them to do mandatory checks of everything to make sure it really was just him being stupid. It was January in New England during a cold snap. We had an old man living downstairs and he was very paranoid. A great quote from him about me is that duck in itch upstairs is tapping my phone lines. They had a terrible relationship. The girl would tell him about her infidelities and then laugh in his face. The guy would then yell about the different ways he was going to kill her. Then they would duck. Florida, not even once. I was 13 at the time. He tried to steal my dog and her puppies. He tried to enter our house and when my mom and I stopped him he told us he could break our necks whenever he wanted. Quite a nice guy. We obviously called the cops after that. Had this one old lady in the apartment next to me tap on her side of the wall separating us. Was freaked out for about a week and when I finally bumped into her going into my house she said she was trying to have a convo through Morse code. WTF. My old neighbor used to walk his dog on a leash to it in my yard. My mom had me throw it back in his yard once. He called the police and claimed he never did that. A few months later my family and I were going out of town and after we left our house, my mom had realized she had forgotten something. We turned around only to find our neighbor standing in the middle of our yard with his dog on a leash dropping a nice dookie in our front yard. All I remember is my mom winding down her window and yelling "Duck you Don." One got the cops called on them because their oldest son was cracked out and got in a huge fight with the mom in the front lawn. Turns out, he was also wanted for armed robbery and aggravated assault. The cops got the wrong house and started banging on our house at 1 AM in the morning until my very irritated father pointed them to the real home. Not sure if that counts because it's indirect, but yeah, it was kinda tamer than the time the girl who lived in the other side of our duplex kicked her boyfriend out but he was tweaking on PCP and literally threw their stove through the itty wall that connected their kitchen to ours. Fun. They insisted that we pay to have a gate installed between our backyard fences so that they may use our above ground pool as they please. Preferably when they invite friends over. When we denied, they threw a hissy fit and found an excuse to punish us. You see, the pool was going through some expensive issues with leakage into the yard. They threatened to call the fine happy hour because the water was barely leaking into their yard they rarely used and their dog was getting sick drinking the water. It wasn't Not wanting to deal with that bullet and also wanting to clean our own backyard of the pond that begun housing frogs. My father spent his birthday day off from work in the Texas heat digging a trench and installing a pipe so that the water could drain. The neighbors came outside and harassed Dad the entire time he was digging the trench, telling him it would have just been easier to install the gate. Would have been easier to install a shovel into your frontal lobe. Ducking profligates. My smart neighbors have put up 3 bird feeders on the trees where my parking spot is. I've literally woken up to quite itty situations because of this. I genuinely don't think they did it to be malicious. I just didn't think they were thinking of what that would do. And now I don't know what I should do about it. Edit. Here's a pic. I rented a house that had a rental basement suite. It was a 1-bedroom. But an adult mom and 2 adult sons all moved in there. They would fight, burn their food, and it would stink into our house. One of the sons, who was in his mid-20s, hooked up with a 14-year-old girl in the neighborhood. The mom had the yappiest dog ever. At the time, my 5-year-old son had seen something on TV and told the mom that he heard that yappy dogs have short lives. Lol. Anyway, they all moved out eventually. I heard a really loud banging one evening and walked outside to see a fire extinguisher on the floor and a woman on her phone. I was puzzled, but I put the extinguisher back and went back inside. A few minutes later I heard the banging again and opened up the door to see the woman trying to beat down the door across from mine with the fire extinguisher. Apparently this was the ex-GF of one of my neighbor's friends and she was trying to find him even though he was quite clearly not there. I called the police, and interestingly enough, my neighbor told me she got a DUI that night in an unrelated incident. My across the hall apartment neighbor is married, has 2 kids, and he is so weird. Like just overall off-putting. Anyways, I leave my sandals out next to my door. No shoes in the house. Every night. It so happens one night I had to meet my best friend who came over in the dead of night at the front since she doesn't know my place very well. As I open the door I catch him caressing and smelling my sandals. I freeze and just mildly freak. He saw me staring, did a weird geisha giggle, said something about his kids calling him, and then he yanked me into this weird side hug. Now I'll leave my shoes in a box inside my house. Ugh. She wants us to tear out our driveway because gravity and water rolls downhill. She's a loon. When the driveway was put in 25 years ago, it was all done by contractors and up to code. She's threatened to sue us because her yard is at the bottom of a hill. We're in Georgia and last year we had a bunch of rain. More than normal. So of ducking course she had 3 inches of standing water. She said she talked to a lawyer and her case was solid, and that she corroborated everything with our builder neighbor across the street. When intimidation didn't work and hubby basically told her to duck off, we came home to a fence separating our properties. Guess it was supposed to offend us? Anyway, that was the best fence ever. Guess what they say is true. Great fences make great neighbors, and we have talked to her in a year. When I moved into my house, I made an effort to meet all of my neighbors. Instead of being a creep and knocking on doors, over a few months I just waited until I saw someone outside and casually walked over to introduce myself. Well, one night an African American neighbor of mine was having a big loud party, and I walked over to say hi around 8 PM. It was a birthday party for one of his grandkids, but there were folks all out in the yard. So I thought it was okay to say hi. I said, "Hey, I'm Dodesiphus. I moved into this street a few doors down a couple of months ago. I was just stopping over to introduce myself." He said, "Do you look like the Methodican color that's supposed to be in this yard?" I apologized and went home. He died of a heart attack a couple of years later, probably from being such a hateful head. So I live in Puerto Rico, where most of the island has been without power for the past 2 months following Hurricane Mara, due to our government's power authority being quite slow in the recuperation process. A lot of neighborhoods in my area have been hiring private contractors to bring the electricity back. In my case, I found a contractor willing to bring our neighborhood's power grid back on, but I needed unanimous support from the neighbors to pay and authorize the process. Most were on board for this, but 2 of my next doors opposed it for some reason. When we asked why, they said that they wanted the neighborhood without power so the rest of us would eventually leave and they'd never have to see our annoying and pathetic faces again. so it was pretty much a no-go on the contractor. Fast forward a week and we find out that these next doors had a friend in the power authority who asked them to keep away private contractors from the neighborhood so the authority could take credit when power is eventually restored. TLDR. We almost had power back in the neighborhood, but neighbors ducked us over as a favor for a friend. Nothing. I think I live in heaven. The apartment above mine got swatted once because it was empty and some guy fleeing from an arrest had broken in and holed up in there with guns. I had to go to her house and remind her. Her baby of 2 years was crying outside. I'm not even kidding. When I knocked no one was home but her 8-year-old daughter waited with us until 3 AM. I had work at 4 AM. There was an old woman in my neighborhood when we first moved in that would rip down posters of lost pets. Even ones handmade by little kids who wrote in crayon about their lost kitty. It doesn't happen anymore as far as I know. So maybe she moved. Or died. Next door neighbor was always creepy. He wanted us to always come inside and play with his cats. When he was moving out he offered me an Air Force jacket. I was about 10 at the time. He said if I wanted to get the jacket I had to come with him to get it from some guy's house. After I told him I need to ask my mom he disappeared. To this day I think he wanted to abduct me. We had a neighbor of ours, also a retired police officer, and his 50 saucer doorbell ditch us for around a month. The crazy thing is we never knew it was him. Apparently he was mad at us because we had a dog that would bark and disturb. He never told us about this, so I don't feel too bad. He also keyed the car to one of my house guests at the time. Finally, one day before we were moving out, he doorbell ditched us. My wife and I looked at each dead in the eye and without a word I sprinted out the front door and she took off out the back. We had this unspoken thing where we were like, let's trap this mother ducker. I'm more impressed than we did this and were so tight that we didn't need to say anything to one another. I caught up with our shirtless neighbor and he put his hands up and said, okay, you got me. I said, dude, what the duck? Why are you doing this? He was drunk as all hell and then proceeded to tell me about my barking dog. He apologized and said he should have told us about it. Not me, but my aunt. My aunt, who was a single mother at the time and ran a daycare service in her house, lived next to a psychopath. After a bad ice storm one day, my aunt had a bunch of tree limbs fall into her backyard. Her neighbor's husband came over and cleaned it up for her. You know, just being a good neighbor. And in turn, my aunt thanked him with a case of beer. You know, just being a good neighbor. Well, his wife took that as flirting, and so began a one-sided feud against my aunt. It was a while ago, so I don't remember everything. What I remember though was horrifying. She tried to run over my aunt's dog once. Another time she called Child Protective Services and told them my aunt was a prostitute and working at her house during the daycare hours. Probably the worst one though was when my aunt found a bit of her house and grass near the house burned. She's old high school friends with the fire inspector, so he came and confirmed a fire was started using a propellant. My aunt took her to court over these things, but I don't remember what came of it. I'm pretty sure she at least got a restraining order. One time my neighbor drove through my fence, around 2 trees, and out the other side of the fence, claiming she had a bug in her eye. Our neighbors across the fence are a used car lot. There is a gap between 2 fences and one day we found old oil cans and light bulbs among other trash in between our fences. Also, we found trash in our yard from them and I just threw it back across the fence. So my neighbors went out of town this week. Real nice people. But they have 3 dogs and left one of them there in the backyard with a doggy door. I feel really bad for this dog. But this dog has not once stopped barking since Monday. Christ, I don't even think that's possible. I love waking up at 5 cause of that ducker. Definitely gonna see how this plays out. But this is the worst experience. On a side note, my dad once threw a chair at my neighbor's driveway, so I guess we were those neighbors once. My upstairs neighbor, who was quiet and respectful for the entire year, decided to crank his music during finals week during my senior year. Knocked on the door twice and asked him to turn it down, only to have him crank it up minutes later. Windows were shaking from the bass. Finally, on the 3rd try, I called the cops, who issued him a citation. After the cops left, he decided to bring 3-4 friends to try and knock down my apartment door. It took pointing a pistol at them through the window to make them go away. I was happy to be done with college. Just 3 days ago, the neighbor's dog attacked my dog in the street. My dog was on a leash. The other dog wasn't and came charging at us and just like a hellhound attacked my dog. Being that the dog looked like a pit bull and was about 60 pounds. And I don't know if this thing has diseases and not wanting to risk getting bitten. I tried to shoot it. Just one shot and it ran away. I missed and the gunshot woke up the entire neighborhood. The owner came out yelling at me as if allowing my dog, or myself, to be ripped open would be the better choice. 3 cop cars showed up creating quite the show. Now I have to go to court Jan 10th for discharging a firearm in city limits. I can't wait to go actually. Seeing them hang their pet dog on its hind legs to train it. It was at 5 PM and me and my sister were chilling at home watching some Doctor Who, and then we heard this really loud yelping outside our house, and my sister and I decided to walk outside and peer through a bush and see what the hell was going on at our neighbor's backyard barn. When we saw it, we decided to call 911 and get the cops over and arrest the son of a bitch. BTW, they have mistreated animals before with a German Shepherd. It hung itself on their fence with the rope they tied it with, and a bull. They slit its throat and let it bleed out while it was screaming. DLDR. My neighbor tried to kill their dog but I stopped him by calling the cops. Proof. Edit. 600 upvotes. Thank you everyone.